This is part 4 of Unit 4, and the next lectures are going to focus primarily on chapters 11 and 12. And you can see kind of on the board here I have America becomes a modern nation. So this is kind of how we're pulling out of the time where we're an infant nation, where we've come to the point now where we know we're going to exist and survive. We've come through the crisis that was solved by the Constitution and so forth. And so this is kind of in the early years how we become kind of a modern nation. And the theme of, as you can see on the board here, chapters 11 and 12, is how the country begins the process of becoming a nation of Americans rather than people from different states. And this is a slow process. It's a hard process. But today we don't think of ourselves really as North Dakotans. We first think of ourselves as Americans. But in the 1800s, that was different. Everybody thought of the state where you were born as kind of your home first, and America kind of came second. So a lot of what we're talking about here is kind of what's going to unify us into a country and make us American. So let's start going through some of the ideas. One of the things that's changed, and this is found in the beginning story of chapter 11, is politics at the time. Politics are now different than they were before. They've evolved, they've changed over time. Pretty soon what's going to happen is that common man, the suffrage movement, the right to vote is going to get expanded, and more people are going to be allowed to vote. As a result, political parties are no longer going to be just for the elite. It's not going to be political meetings like they were at the Constitutional Convention where you just have the wealthy or the well-educated. You're going to have more middle-class people. You're going to have people further down on the rungs of society. And more people are going to be involved than ever before, which is something that's going to be unique to America. Again, in the other countries of the world at the time, it's primarily still going to be run by the aristocracy. But America, the political parties are going to evolve. It's no longer going to be the Federalists and Anti-Federalists where you have just really, for the most part, wealthy, well-educated people in them. You're going to have common people in there as well. And that's a big change. We're going to go back to having two parties. The era of good feelings is over where we have just the Jeffersonian Party or the Republican Party. We're going to have two parties again, and sometimes that's referred to as the second American party system, and it's going to be more of what we have in line today where you have the Republicans and the Democrats. So not only are you going to have more people involved, but you're going to splinter off into two factions again that are going to vie for power and play off each other, and that's the second American party system. Basically what that is again is just when we go back to having two political parties instead of one like we had with the era of good feelings. Okay? One of the things that's different about these political parties, remember the first ones were Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The main thing they disagreed about was governmental power. Federalists wanted a strong central government. Anti-Federalists wanted the power in the states. And that's mainly what they disagreed about. They disagreed about one issue. But our political system is going to be a little bit different. We're going to have two major political parties, and they're going to have things in them to appeal to everybody, not just one single item. We'll see some of that later on where we'll have basically one single parties, but they don't last very long. So we have kind of, I guess to sum up here, the second American party system is going to emerge kind of what we have it today, where we have the Republicans and Democrats, and each one of those parties try to have a little bit of everything for everyone. They have lots of different platforms or planks to their platform that they have, not just one single issue. For example, not just abortion. They talk about, they differ on national defense. They differ on economy. They differ on immigration. They have more issues that they're involved with, and they're trying to appeal to everybody, I guess is the point I'm getting here. So more like our parties that we have today. And if you read the story at the beginning of chapter 11, you know that one of the big deals was strict party loyalty, kind of like we have today, where we have this dreadlock where all the Democrats vote yes or no on an issue and all the Republicans, or just about all of them. And that's also where you see the roots of that, where you have people whose job is basically to make sure, hey, the vote's coming up on this, let's say it's a new courthouse we're going to build. You better vote like all the rest of us Democrats, and so forth. So that tradition of strict party, voting along strict party lines like we have for majority of the time today, starts at this period. So this is kind of the modern political time coming of age. This is when political parties at this time look an awful lot like they do in our world today. As I mentioned a little earlier, suffrage, which means the right to vote. Sometimes we get confused that it's just women's right to vote, but the word suffrage means just right to vote, anyone's right to vote. And at this time we have the expansion of that to include more people than any other nation on the planet. Now we're still talking about white men for the most part, and in most cases we're still talking about owning property, but the property qualifications are so low that almost all white men can vote. And that's a big change again, seeing the ideas here of the Enlightenment in action, America becoming that kind of republic that they envisioned, but maybe expanding to include more people than the founders had even wanted. But that's an important point here, is suffrage is expanding. And you can see here on the board the statistic that kind of backs this up. In 1800, less than half of all white men could vote, but by 1840, 90% of the white men could vote. And so you see that expanding of that suffrage taking place in these years from the Constitutional Convention to the Civil War. More and more white men can vote, still just white men. And a lot of that has to do with the president known as Andrew Jackson, which will come up in further our discussion in our lectures. What brought this change on, which is something we're always looking for, what brought this change was mainly the westward expansion of the country. As the country moved further west, there wasn't that many people out there, let alone wealthy people or the educated people that normally were allowed to vote. So they had to include more and more people in order to meet the qualifying conditions to get statehood. And so they had to change the rules so they had enough people to meet those qualifications. And that's a big part of it. There's just simply not enough people out there. They have to expand or change the rules. And also there's a growing sentiment that the common man is not going to be as easily manipulated as the framers thought. That the common man is capable of making informed decisions, that he's capable of rational thought and not just going to be blown by the winds of one politician or another, which is what the framers thought. They were very concerned about that, remember. There's a growing belief that the common man can make these decisions, can understand, and can be involved in politics. But probably, to be honest with you, the westward expansion is probably a little bit more key to that. Moving on, let's talk a little bit more about politics here, and we'll talk about presidential elections. Now, one thing to notice about elections, one of the changes that is occurring here as we get further along in the early 1800s is that elections are now becoming more of a national thing. In order to win, you can't just appeal to the north or to the south. You have to bring all the regions together in order to get enough electoral votes or enough support to win. That was different than before. Before, in the early years when there was only 13 or so states, you could win with just a handful. But now as the country has expanded and more states are added, you have to garner support from more than just one region, like your home region. You have to appeal to people around the country. So you have to try to get votes from the south, the frontier of the west, and the north. And that's kind of going to be carried on even today. A good example of this is what they tried to do here shortly is to what we call balance the ticket, where you have the presidential candidate from one region and your vice president from another. So for example, if I'm running for presidency, I might be from the north, but my vice president might be from the west. Therefore, I'm trying to get votes from both sections, and that's a tradition that is kind of carried on to today. Let's take a look at the election of 1824 then for president, which was pretty controversial. As you can see, John Quincy Adams, who was the son of our second president, John Adams, wins, but he wins in a very controversial way. There were 4 guys running for president, and none of them got enough electoral votes. And so what happens then is it goes to the House of Representatives to decide. What is believed to have happened is that John Quincy Adams makes a deal with one of the other candidates, gives him a job in the cabinet as Secretary of the State. It's our buddy Henry Clay from the West, and that gives then Adams enough votes to become president. This angers a lot of people in Congress, and as you can see, they become very hostile towards him, and he doesn't get a lot of laws passed because of that, because they kind of stonewall him. They don't allow him to get much done because they don't feel he rightfully has the presidency. One of the other major guys running is Andrew Jackson, who you remember is the hero of the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans. He feels like he's got the short end of the stick here because he actually won the popular vote. More people voted for him than Quincy, but Quincy ends up with more electoral votes, which is what matters, and he ends up getting the presidency. This ultimately then is what shows a split then that splits the party into 2 that I mentioned earlier. So we kind of end that era of good feelings. It splits here because a lot of people think Jackson should be the president, and of course some people are loyal to John Quincy Adams as well. And one other note here, we sometimes have the idea that presidential elections back in this day and age are way different than our modern day elections, and it's really quite the opposite. One of the things that cost Andrew Jackson several votes is a lot of slanderous attacks against his character, particularly directed at his current wife. And you'll see more of this in the video that we watch about Andrew Jackson in class. But my point being, they did a lot of the nasty character assaults and things that we have today. And so it wasn't really that different. However, one thing that was different is back in this time that we're studying, you didn't really politic for yourself. You had friends or supporters that went out and made speeches for you and did your campaigning. You just basically threw your hat in the ring, and other people tried to get you president. So that's a little bit different. But the election of 1824 is very controversial. Jackson loses, but Quincy Adams doesn't really do much, and so he loses the rematch in 1828, which again is kind of the result of the shady election in the 1824 one. In 1828, Andrew Jackson, as you can see here, easily wins the rematch, overwhelming popular and electoral vote, and he becomes the next president. What this election showed is the importance of winning popular opinion and being someone that people liked, being a well-liked person rather than just, this person's the best for the job. This person might have more qualifications, but this person over here is more charismatic, better looking. Andrew Jackson exemplifies that with his war hero record, and so he easily wins election. And it also shows that politics really now has become a national thing. You can't win enough of the vote. Like Quincy Adams was from the north. You can't get enough support with just that region. You have to branch out and reach to other ones as well. You have to bring in support from other areas, or you're not going to be successful, which is a big change. Because again, prior to that, you could specialize. You could just say I stand for this on a couple issues, and that would be enough to get you elected. But now as the country's grown, there's more electoral votes, more states out there, so you have to appeal to other regions in order to get enough to win. And just kind of exemplifying what I mentioned earlier, this really shows the importance of having a balanced ticket like we have today, where you have one presidential candidate from one region and run from another. That's why, for example, you oftentimes will have someone from California running. He's on the West Coast, so they'll pick someone from the East Coast, like say New York or Florida, to kind of balance out the ticket so you have different regions of the country represented, which is a tradition today. So to sum up, the politics is really changing. We're going back to having two political parties where you're very loyal to your political party, And the political parties are developing more into what we have today, where you have an appeal to lots of different people across all different parts of the country, trying to get people from all the regions to support your candidate. And it also is kind of becoming kind of more nasty, like our campaigns sometimes are today. And that ends part 4.